Okay, excellent. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
And hi, everyone. This is Thomas Newman of Viva Financial Tuition, and I'm joining Laura's webinar just for the start today. So you can see the people are flooding in. Participant number going up. Excellent. Okay, so today's webinar is a free webinar, and we'll send out the recording after. Feel free to share it with anyone you think would benefit. It's going to be 2 hours long, more or less. Laura's going to walk you through the first half of the pre-scene, and there'll be a break in the middle for 10-15 minutes. There'll be time for questions at the end. And as I said, this is a free webinar. If you want to participate in the rest of Viva's SCS course for May 2023, I'm going to discuss how you can do that. There are a number of courses that we have. So if you want to participate from tomorrow onwards in the remainder of the SCS course, you would need to actually purchase a course, unlike today's session, which, as I said, is free. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen to discuss the different course options that you have. Can you see that, Laura?
Yep, that's perfect.
Great, excellent. Okay, so I'll send these links after as well. So the first course option that you have is the standard SCS course. So in this course, you've got about 35 hours of course content overall, between webinar sessions, mock exams, etc. So with Laura, you'll have a number of live webinar events like this one. I think there are 7 in total. They will all be recorded. So if you miss any, you can watch the recording the next day. The recordings will be put up on the website. There are notes that accompany each of these sessions that you can refer to as well. You can download them. Mock exams, there are 5 mock exams for this particular course. They all come with model solutions. So really, really useful. And if you're taking a look at the course syllabus, this is what we recommend. Okay, so we do recommend that you go through what we call this pre-course work. There's a useful series of refresher videos on E3, F3, and P3 theories. So that's a useful start. Then we've got a series of videos on actually preparing for the case study. So looking at the format of the exam, talking about your role as a senior manager, how to make use of the pre-scene materials, etc. There are a series of videos as well on the exam day strategy. So what do you actually do on the day of the exam? What is the examiner expecting? How do you manage your time? Some important do's and don'ts, etc. And then there's a really useful series of videos on what constitutes a good answer versus what constitutes a poor answer, and why one is good and one is bad. So that's a really practical session delivered by a former CIMA prize winner. Okay, then week 1 is really where we are now. So this first session is the pre-scene analysis, the first half of that, and that is a free session. As I said, it'll last 2 hours. We record it and put up on the website. It'll be shared with you. Tomorrow then is when the remainder of the course commences. And as I said, to unlock the rest of the course, you need to pay for a course option. Okay, so industry analysis tomorrow. Then on 2 days after that, you've got the second half of the pre-scene. Into week 2, then you've got a mock exam. They come with model solutions, all of these mocks. As I said, there is a webinar on E3 applied. So what we're doing there is we're taking the most useful theories from E3 as they relate to this particular case, and talking through why they're important for this particular case, and what kinds of questions could come up on the day of the exam and how you might respond to them. So really useful. Week 3 then sees you do the second mock. Then you've got a live webinar session applying the main theories from F3 to the case. Week 4, you've got the third mock exam. You've got a webinar on applying the most important P3 theories to the case. Into week 5, then you've got the 4th mock and a final webinar on the key issues, which are the top 10 or so most important issues that you have reviewed over the last few weeks and how they might come up on the day of the exam. And in the final week, then you do the 5th and final mock exam. So that's the standard SCS course. And you have it there, SCS completes standard course. That's £199. Okay, there is a lighter version of that where you get the pre-scene analysis only and the 5 mock exams and model solutions, but you don't get any of the rest. You don't get those applied E3, F3, P3 lectures. You don't get the key issues. You don't get the industry analysis. You don't get any of that pre-course work that I mentioned either, or the notes. Okay, so that's an overview of the standard course, and probably left out the most important bit, which is your tutor is Laura Winkworth. And Laura's been working with us for a number of years now, and she is a fantastic tutor. Okay, if you go to our Trustpilot page, for example, you'll see former students raving about Laura as a tutor. We have a number of prize-winning students that have gone through our SCS courses, and I'll let Laura talk a little bit more about her own background as a tutor. But safe to say that you're in very, very safe hands with Laura. Okay, so we'll share this page, as I said, after, and there are some frequently asked questions at the end. You can always as well use the chat box or the Q&A box in this webinar to send through any questions. It's important also to mention at this point that if you have any questions relating to the theory or the content of the case, Laura is the right person there. But if you've got questions on anything more administrative, such as prices, duration of courses, when things are occurring, etc., it would be best to address them to me, or to send an email to info@vivatuition.com. Okay, info@vivatuition.com. So the other course option that we have for the SCS is the SCS Elite course. So this is a course really, this is our best SCS course. And it's for people who are maybe struggling with the SCS exam. Maybe you've done it before and you failed, and you just want to go the extra mile and ensure that you pass it this time. Or maybe you're looking to really do well on this course. This is a great option. This is a very in-depth course. It's very interactive. So there are a lot of workshop sessions with Laura where you get to interact with her. There's a private community where you get to interact with her as well. So the Elite course includes everything that I've just pointed out on the SCS standard course. So you get all of those webinars that I mentioned. They're all recorded. You also get the 5 mock exams with model solutions. The difference is, though, with the Elite course, you also get marking included. Okay, so that's a really important additional feature. So there's about 49 hours of overall course content included here. And there's this combination, I suppose, of more personal coaching from Laura, plus the additional live webinar or workshops, rather. They're very, very interactive exam focus sessions. There are about 12 hours of those, plus professional marking. So for each of the 5 mock exams you take, you receive a report with your strengths, your weaknesses, your scores, etc., how you can improve. And if we get into the details, there are about 34 hours of live classes, recorded lessons, and workshop sessions for this Elite course. You get access to a private community where you can interact with Laura on an ongoing basis. So there's lots of additional discussion outside of the formal classes that you do there. You get, as I said, personalized marking services for all 5 of your mocks, and you have the option to join the course and pay later. So if you want to join this Elite course, you pay £99 now, and the remaining balance of £600 is paid over 6 months. So the total course fee is £699 for the elite course. Probably recognize that it's quite a lot of money. This price point is much better than other tuition providers for equivalent courses. So these courses typically go for 800, 900, £1,000 plus. Please feel free to check out other SCS courses by other tuition providers, and you will see that for this kind of involved course, you are talking about those prices. So if you want to join this course, it's £99 now. You can just click on any of the join May 23 Elite buttons on this page, and you'll be prompted to pay a £99 deposit. As I said, the remaining £600 is paid over 6 monthly installments of £100. And the course syllabus, everything, as I said, that is included in the SCS standard course is included here, but you'll see some additional elements. You've got these additional workshops. So these are 2-hour workshops where Laura will be, focusing on very, very exam-centric, practical topics, very interactive. So whereas the webinar is more like a traditional lecture, where you would keep your questions until the end, the workshops are far more interactive, where there's a back and forth between Laura and students throughout. So week 2, you'll see that for each mock exam that you do, you're getting feedback. That's crucial. And then following that feedback, the workshops very often focus on a debrief of the mock exam that you have just done. Okay, so that'll be a 2-hour session debriefing the mock exam, the solution, what constituted a good answer, a bad answer, etc. So really, they're the big differences between the standard course and the elite course. The additional mock marking services, extra contact time with Laura on the community, and these workshop sessions. There's another crucial point relating to the SCS Elite course. If you fail this May 23 exam, and we don't think that you will if you go through this course and take it seriously, but if you do fail, you get access to the August 23 Elite course free of charge. Okay, so that gives you that reassurance and peace of mind that if you fail, you can repeat for free. Okay, so as I said, you can just hit any of those calls to action to join the course, and you pay a £99 deposit, and you're into the course. Okay, so I think that's it from me, really. As I said, if there's any administrative type question, please address it to me in the Q&A or chat box, and or send us an email at info@vivatuition.com. So I'm going to hand back over to Laura now. Let's see.
Right. Shall I try and share my screen, Thomas, and we'll get this sorted?
I'm going to make you host now, Laura.
Okay.
Let's see. Can I do that? Maybe you are the host already.
Should we try?
Oh, I think you are.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Excellent. Okay, I think I will put it on full screen mode whilst you're here. Just double check that we get everything working, and I've got my little pointer.
That's it.
Awesome.
That's it.
So you'll be
Excellent.
staying around, Thomas, for a wee bit in case there's any administrative questions.
I'll hang around and I'll be popping in and out to see if there are any questions for me.
Okay, no worries.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so welcome. My name is Laura Winkworth, and I will be the host for today, for the rest of today, to have a look at the pre-scene. And also, as Thomas said, I will be the SCS tutor presenting for those live webinars. And also, if you choose to join the elite group, then that will be with me. So what we will do today is we will cover overall about half of this pre-scene document, and then the second half will be covered in the second pre-scene analysis. And as Thomas said, that's sort of midway through next week. Today we will cover, I think, the first 6 pages or so, then we'll take a wee break. I like to have a look and see if there's any questions, have a little bit of a chat, that side of things. And then we will cover another 6-7 pages to take us up to halfway through. So the main focus of today will be having a look at the industry backdrop. Again, a lot of students can skip over that, but that's a big mistake. The first half of the precinct, what we cover today, is really, really important to have a look at. So what I would suggest is maybe have a piece of paper in front of you, a couple of lists to get ready. We want to have a look at any technical issues that we raise. So you might want to note those down, maybe some things to brush up on. We will give you potential exam day scenarios. So you might want to make a list of those. I always like to say we want to do our thinking before exam day. So preparing and thinking around exam scenarios, I'm going to raise a lot of those. And the other thing that we will talk about is I've started off my research into this industry. I will share with you some things that I have looked at. So if anything sparks interest in you, or you want to have a look at some real world examples or news articles, etc., or follow up on some of the suggestions that I would make, you might want to note those down as well. So what I'm going to do when we're going to come on to having a look at this, I'll just pop my video off so that we can focus on the screen and what I'm saying. And then when it comes to break time in the middle, I'll pop it on so we can have a wee chat. And then again, at the end, I like to come up and have a little bit of a chat as well. So those of you that will participate in the live sessions and or join the elite group, you know that a big part of it for me is then interacting with the student, seeing how you're getting on, answering your questions and that side of things. And then in the elite group, as Thomas said, we as well as having that interaction very much live and a lot more participative in the workshops, we also have the community through the Circle app. And normally I'm posting on that every day or maybe every other day. Again, as issues arise with students, I'll address those, or perhaps I've seen something that's interesting in the news or some of my research. So there's no set format for the communication there or what we cover, but it is great to have a regular source of communication there. And another thing that's nice is students chat with each other. So it is very participative. So on that one, not necessarily always coming from me. So hopefully we are ready to start to have a look at the pre-scene. So as I said, I will just turn my camera off for this bit, but I will be back in the middle to have a little chat with you there. Okay, so an official welcome to our strategic case study examination. So the pre-scene that we are looking at here is for the May 2023 sitting and also the August 2023 sitting. And this pre-scene is going to be on the fictional company of Daistruk. Now, Daistruk is a third-party logistics company, and we're going to take a look at what that means today in some more detail. Daistruk is based in the fictional country of Roundland. And again, today we will get some information on Roundland in terms of what it's like, its geographical location, etc. And our role is really to embody a senior manager working in finance in Daistruk and within Roundland. So we need to have all of this information at our fingertips today. Now, there is a context statement. We're used to seeing this on the front of certainly the pre-scenes within the last couple of years. And it's important to have a look at this. It's often a question that I will have from students. Now, when you look at this, the examiner is advising us that the general approach is to assume that we live in a world without necessarily the current maybe geopolitical issues that we have, or recently, for example, we were in a COVID world, and generally the advice in this context statement was to approach your case study exam assuming that, COVID doesn't exist. However, that said, if it is relevant, any particular issues that are existing within the real world environment, and you blend those in and they're relevant to the exam day scenario and the task that you're given, then you will get credit for those. So that's something that, again, we can talk about as we go through the course, but you don't have to build in significant current global issues. I think, you know, as they say here, it really is to be fair amongst students between different sittings. So here we are going to start off by having a look at a number of real world examples. So we have these listed up here. And I think it is helpful to identify one or two real world third-party logistic companies and have a look at those as part of your preparation. As I said, you're embodying the role of a senior manager working in the finance function. And I like to pick, well, to start off with, I like to pick one company and focus my research on that. I think that gives me the bigger picture. And then as I progress through my studies and through the course with you, then I start to look at some other examples. So for me, you can see we have three listed here at the top. We have DHL, we have CIMA Logistics, and we have FedEx. And I've started to look at CIMA Logistics the most so far. As I said, it's just because it makes my study and the big picture more manageable. So today, I might refer to CIMA Logistics a lot. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best example overall. It's just the one that I have been looking at. Now, when we look at the contents page, we are going to look today at the logistics industry here. This will be the main focus, but we will start to have a look at Daistruk itself to start off with. And then in the second webinar, we will pick up the board of directors, the principal risks. We'll have a look at the financial reports and share price history, and very helpfully towards the end of the pre-scene, we will have a look at a couple of news stories. Now, I will refer to some of those news stories today as well, because they help set in context the importance of what we're looking at today and that industry knowledge. Now, as I said at the outset, please don't skip over that industry knowledge at the beginning. It makes up half the pre-scene. And the examiner has said in recent advice that one of the top tips that they would have for students is to make sure that you know the pre-scene inside out. And that is the entire pre-scene, not just the stuff in the latter half that relates to Daistruk. You have to have that understanding to understand the context of the scenarios that you are going to see on exam day. And this is the absolute minimum level of industry knowledge that you would need. The danger, if we don't look at this first half of the pre-scene in sufficient detail, is that we will say something in our answer that contradicts that context that the examiner has given us. And as I said, this is the minimum level of knowledge, so it is really, really important. Now, before we go on and have a look at our industry analysis, let's take a look at this introduction, because there's quite a lot that we can say at this stage already. You can see here that it is telling us that Daistruk is a quoted company and it offers logistics services. Now, I'm always glad when we see the case study is a quoted company rather, because it makes life a lot easier, I think, for testing. So let's think about a quoted company, and that is going to bring some benefits and drawbacks. An obvious benefit is we will have greater access to capital. So, for example, we could raise equity finance through the stock exchange. And certainly a very common question that you will get is exploring different forms of finance. So we will be drawing on some F3 knowledge here. Because the company is quoted, we can explore things like rights issues. Or, for example, if we were making an acquisition, we might decide to offer the target shareholders a share-for-share exchange. That is much more common where we have a quoted company. So some initial F3 issues to get down on your list and make sure that you're comfortable with both rights issues and share-for-share exchanges. We'll also have greater access to capital, debt finance, because of the size and status of a quoted company. And that increased reputation will help with suppliers, it will help with customers, but will also help attract investment. Now, that said, where we have a quoted company, there are also a number of drawbacks. And one of the largest ones will be that increased compliance and those higher levels of corporate governance. We will look at the board in more detail in the second pre-scene webinar, but corporate governance from P3 will be a key theme that will be throughout the entire strategic case study. Now, have a think about what type of shareholders that Daistruk might have. It is a quoted company, and as well as having smaller individual shareholders, maybe like you and I, we do have to bear in mind that it is very likely to have larger institutional shareholders. And so the pressure from shareholders may be more prevalent where we have those larger institutional shareholders. They will be key players, they will hold a lot more shares, and they will direct our board to see if they are doing well and give them specific instructions, issues, expectations, that side of things. Now, you can see here in the second paragraph, the role that you will be taking in the case study is that of a senior manager in the finance function, and you are going to be reporting directly to the board. So the scenarios that you will be seeing on exam day often are around special projects or strategic matters. Those strategic matters can be opportunities that Daistruk is exposed to, and more often than not, they are threats or situations that require an urgent response. Now, let's think about that senior manager role. This is really important as well. I see strategic case study as a skills-based exam. Oftentimes, I have students being concerned about, do I have enough E3 knowledge? Do I have enough F3 knowledge, P3 knowledge? Do I have enough industry knowledge, etc.? And yes, you do need that. However, there'll be so much that you have already throughout your own job roles and experience that you can bring to strategic case study. You need to have, for example, skills of prioritization. You need to be able to have a look at an exam day scenario and really see what is the most important issue, what is the significance of the various different factors, and be able to prioritize those. They are the skills that I think are absolutely essential and that we need to have. You have to be able to understand longer term strategic focus. Risk management is key. Now, we know with risk management, we will always have various different factors. We need to prioritize those and show the most significant ones. When we're reporting directly to the board, they will expect us to do that. And you will have a much stronger answer if you can do that, okay? And I will show you how to do that on the course. One of the nice hacks, as I would say, is to be very comfortable with the principal risks, which we will look at in the second pre-scene webinar. If they are a principal risk, by their very nature, then they are going to be significant issues. So that's something that you can do to help you prioritize. We will look at governance issues, and that will also include ethical issues from E3, very, very heavily tested. You need to advise on financial strategy. That will be looking at a range of options and, very importantly, tailoring that financial strategy to not only the pre-scene information, but what you're seeing in that exam day scenario. You have to be really agile to react to what you're seeing on the day. Strategy evaluation is really common. As we progress through today, there'll be a couple of exam day scenarios where I will say perhaps Daistruk might face this issue, or perhaps they might be thinking about this opportunity. And a very, very common question is to evaluate that strategy. So from E3, you might look at that suitable, acceptable, and feasible model, or you might be asked for strategic implications, which is slightly wider. So what are those longer term, more strategic implications of a situation or a strategy that we are facing? And again, picking up on E3, having an awareness of stakeholder management is key. So as we progress through today, keep a note of those key stakeholders. We've already mentioned one group of key stakeholders with regard to us being a quoted company. Institutional shareholders, really, really important. Now let's have a look at Roundland, and we're told Roundland is a developed country. This is the norm, certainly within our strategic case study. And we're also told it has an active and well-regulated stock exchange. As you see here, the fact that we have a developed country is good for a logistics company. It means there's highly likely to be a good infrastructure that's going to support that efficient transport of goods. So that is the road network, rail network, sea, air, etc. The fact that we have an active and well-regulated stock exchange, again, this is very common in strategic case study pre-scenes. And what I would say here is have a think about your F3 knowledge and make sure that you are comfortable with the efficient market hypothesis. Because we have an active and well-regulated stock exchange, we are likely to have a semi-efficient or semi-strong market. And a very common question will be that perhaps something happens, we have some new market information, and you either have to explain the share price movement using the efficient market hypothesis, or that share price movement might be a strategic implication that you would be looking at in a wider strategic answer. So if we have a semi-strong market, remember that will reflect all past information and all public information and some private information. But if something happens in an exam day scenario, then the market will react to incorporate that information. So you need to be ready for that. So already quite a lot of detail on that first page and in the introduction itself. Now we're going to start to have a look at the industry, and we are going to look at logistics itself. So I'm going to chat you through an overview of the process. You can see we have a diagram here on the screen, and then we have a wee bit more detail after that. And then I am going to introduce you to two companies that you may see on exam day. Now, we don't always see this in strategic case study exams in this first half of the pre-scene. So I would definitely be expecting to see these two companies. We'll look at Multor Motors and Muddock Supermarkets, and we have to understand those. It's great because they have provided these as illustrations of the logistics process to help us understand it. But as I said, I'd be expecting to see these on exam day as well. Now, when we're looking at logistics here in this initial paragraph, essentially, what we're looking at is managing that flow of goods. And a key phrase here for me is on time. Logistics is all about having the right goods in the right place at the right time. That's what Daistruk's customers will be expecting. And they want to have that done in a way that is safe. That might be in terms of safety of any individuals in the process, but also looking after the goods themselves and making sure they are safe, and it has to be efficient as well. Now, when we're looking at the three aspects of logistics, this is something you are going to need to know inside out, and it is terminology you will be expected to look out. So we have our inbound logistics, that will be from suppliers, bringing them into storage. Then when they're in storage, we have internal logistics, and then we have our outbound logistics, which is getting it to the customer. Now here, before we go and have a look at the detail, let's have a think from an E3 point of view. I've mentioned that things need to be on time, in the right place and on time. I've mentioned they need to be safe. And also we are looking at efficiency and cost management. Now, from my initial reading, I would add another factor here, and that is flexibility. From what I've looked at so far, customers want flexibility in their logistics as well. So when we're looking at being on time, being safe, efficient, and flexibility, we could apply some E3 theory to this, and that would be our critical success factors. These are things that we must be good at. And again, from an E3 perspective, linking in with those critical success factors, how are we managing that performance? What does our performance measurement system look like? Is it going to flag up if we are doing well, or flag up, importantly, any problem in the system any problem with achieving those critical success factors in sufficient time for the board to do something about it. And when you have a look at the strategic case study exam blueprint, you will see that one of your core activities is all around KPIs and performance measurement. So one thing you might want to start to think about or have a look at real world examples is certain KPIs. So how do we measure being on time, being efficient, being safe, and flexibility? One other thing I would say here as well from an E3 point of view, I've mentioned critical success factors, but we could also talk about competencies. And you could say, yeah, okay, we need to be good at safety, being on time, efficiency, and flexibility. But ask yourself, would you say they are threshold competencies, or would you say they are core competencies? I would argue strongly that they are just threshold competencies. They are the minimum things that a logistics company needs to be good at. And what I want you to think about as we progress through the briefing, or as you look at your wider reading, is think about how can Daistruk develop some core competencies? How are they going to outperform the competition in these areas? And one thing that my research has shown to date is through the digitization or the automation of the process. That I think is going to be a key theme that we will see. Okay, so think about how are we going to outperform that competition. Now let's take a wee look at these three inbound, internal and outbound logistics in a little bit more detail. Again, you need a good understanding of these and what happens at each stage of the process. So inbound logistics is all about procurement. The internal logistics is then about the storage and handling of those goods. A key thing will be maintaining inventory records, and we'll be having a look at that in more detail. Again, I would say a key area for digitization. And then the outbound logistics is all about getting those goods to the customer, and it is about making sure that we can efficiently get the goods in the warehouse, pack them correctly and dispatch those goods. Now, a fourth area that I think is really important, it isn't in the diagram, but I think it should be, is that outbound logistics will now also include reverse logistics. And reverse logistics is where a customer, for whatever reason, wants to return an item, and it has to come back into the supply chain. So as it suggests here, that might be a defective good, or it might be returning some or all of the packaging for recycling. And what we may see as a potential exam day scenario, so something to have a look at real world analogous situations, would be Daistruk upgrading its infrastructure to make sure that it can carry out efficient reverse logistics for its clients. I think with the rise of online shopping, reverse logistics is becoming very, very important from end consumers like you and I, and having those goods coming efficiently back into the supply chain. Another area with reverse logistics that you might want to have a look at would also be the sustainability issue. So for example, if we take the example of fast fashion, quite a lot of fast fashion retailers are now starting to charge customers for reverse logistics. And again, that is about discouraging maybe ordering a lot and then sending a lot back, and the negative impact, negative environmental impact that might have as well. Okay. Now, at each stage of this process, communication is absolutely key. And for the system to work at its most efficient, we have to have flows of communication, and the information has to be accurate. And this leads us on to another key area of E3, which would be digital technology. I think this is going to be a very, very important part of this case study. And we referenced before critical success factors. We referenced core competencies that will help us outperform the competition. And from what I've looked at so far, it is that flow of information and that software that is going to be that unique selling point. That's what we want to have a look at. There's a really great series of interviews and includes some videos that I've had a look at. So McKinsey, as you know, is a large management consultant. And McKinsey, either on their website, or you can get it on the app, the McKinsey Insights app, they have a series at the moment called Logistics Disruptors. So that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect for us. And this case study, I've watched quite a few of them, and it really does show that flow of information and that software is a unique selling point, and often increases then the flexibility and the efficiency that the customers are looking for. However, something else that is very, very commonly tested that goes hand in hand with that is the increased cyber security risk. So when we are looking at digital technology or any digital strategies, we must build in the heavily tested area from P3 of cyber security risk. We know that the more digital links that Daistruk will have within the organization, and also with its customers and with its suppliers, then the increased risk from a cybersecurity perspective. So please add to your preparation list to be all over your cybersecurity risk. We know for information to be useful, it has to be available. We have to have integrity of data and integrity of processing, and also we have the confidentiality of data. So that's that AICPA 4 objectives of cybersecurity, or you may know that as the AIC triad as well: availability, integrity, and confidentiality. That can help us analyze particular risks and also recommend controls to mitigate those risks where appropriate. So very, very heavily tested area. Now, the scale and complexity of the logistics that these companies offer is going to vary massively from client to client. And what I really like about this pre-scene, and we haven't seen this before, is we're about to see 2 example companies. So we're going to introduce you now to Multor Motors and also Maddox Supermarkets. As I said, I would be anticipating these being in at least one or more of the variants on exam day. What you will see in the maybe towards the end of today or in the second pre-scene is that Maddox Supermarkets is actually one of Daistruk's biggest customers. So the information that we're about to see here is very, very relevant, and it also is going to help us have a better understanding through these 2 illustrative examples of these 3 key areas of the logistics process. So let's take a look at these, and we'll start off with Multor Motors. So Multor Motors is a global manufacturer, and it has 52 factories across 31 countries. So if it has a third-party logistics provider, this is going to be quite a complicated and complex supply chain that its logistics provider would need to manage. For example, we are told that all of Multor's petrol engines are manufactured in a particular factory located in Eastland, and it now provides the illustration of those 3 areas of logistics using this example. So the inbound logistics would be all around the procurement of any parts or materials that are needed for those engines. Now, it doesn't tell us from which locations globally that they're coming from, but that is something maybe that we would find out on exam day. So how do we get efficiently and safely those engine parts and materials to the Eastland factory to produce those petrol engines? Then the internal logistics side of things is about managing that inventory and making sure that they can supply the factory when required. Now, you might remember way back in E1 or other areas of your study that inventory management is absolutely key. There are costs of holding too much inventory, but there are also costs of not having enough inventory. So the internal logistics is going to be a key function for the overall manufacturing business and a key contributor to efficiency. Then when we come to our outbound logistics, this is about having those completed petrol engines and shipping them as required to the other factories in Multor Motors. So we have 52 factories in 31 countries. They may be going overseas. That seems highly likely, to be honest, and might be going to multiple factories. So it's a good illustration of those three key areas. Now, I find this next paragraph particularly interesting here. So each of the factories, remember 52 factories, has its own logistics system. And those logistics systems interact with third parties. Now, those third parties may be logistics companies, they may be suppliers, for example, and also interact with other factories. So I think potentially an exam day scenario could be that Daistruk comes along, perhaps with its own proprietary software, and says that it can provide a one-stop shop for this. So instead of having individual logistics systems, maybe have a look at a complete logistics and software program that could interact with all of the factories and all the relevant third parties. Again, if we're having a look at that, likely questions could be around the cybersecurity risk. And because this would be a strategic opportunity for Daistruk, you might be asked to evaluate that or look at the strategic implications of that as well. So I think that's very interesting. And also illustrating the fact that different clients have different needs. Here we're told that Multor's logistics are complicated. And the example that they give us here is that often very heavy goods and expensive components need to be shipped around. So for example, any finished vehicles have to be shipped to dealers around the world. Now that might mean that shipping is required. So we will have a look shortly at Daistruk's abilities within shipping. And to me, it would seem to rule out air freight. So we may see this tested if we're asked about Multor Motors in a question. However, draw on the general fact that where we have heavy or expensive components, then it makes it a little bit more complicated. Another thing that I would say here, because undoubtedly we do have a complex supply chain here, and it does increase the risk of Daistruk working with Multor Motors. They will need a sophisticated logistics company, and we need to think about the risks involved in that from a P3 point of view, and managing our reputational risk if anything goes wrong. So it is more complicated. That might provide opportunities for higher fees and higher revenues, but we really would have to do some sort of internal audit on our skills and on our resources to see if we could meet those demands as well. So potentially high risk there as well. And one final point that I'm thinking of on Multor Motors, so far I have discussed this company as being a potential customer, someone that we may see requiring our third-party logistics services. But when we start to have a look at Daistruk and we have a look at the assets that we hold in order to carry out our logistics business, we will see that we do use some smaller cars, trucks and vans. So perhaps as well, we might see Multor Motors as a supplier. That is something that we might see as well. Some of the issues that we will look at is maybe self-driving vehicles, maybe more environmentally friendly vehicles, electric vehicles. That's something that we're seeing a lot within logistics. So anticipate that we might see Multor Motors or working with them, perhaps on one of those issues. Now we're going to look at a very, very different customer. And as I said, we know that Aug Supermarkets is one of our largest customers. We're going to see that later on in the pre-scene. This makes them a key player for us, a key stakeholder. Now, Aug Supermarkets is quite a large supermarket chain. It's one of the largest in Rhineland. So unlike Multor Motors, which has international operations, it appears so far that Aug Supermarkets is based in Rhineland alone. It has 1,270 stores and it has 37 warehouses of itself. And again, what we are provided with in the bullet points here are details of that overview of those three key aspects of logistics with examples here. And it's great to contrast the different needs that we would have with Motor Motors. So our inbound logistics here are basically focusing on deliveries from food manufacturers, and they are going to go to Muddock's own warehouses. And we're told that those warehouses cover a geographical region. So they have them spread out across a geographical region, and that helps massively from a logistics point of view. So it will help reduce the cost of transportation. It will make that transportation more environmentally friendly and mean that they can react more quickly and be more flexible. However, when we're looking at supermarkets and food, we need to build in the specialist nature of the goods that we are looking at here. So we are looking at perishable goods. And the example that they have provided is milk. And certain perishable goods are provided not to the warehouses, but direct to the shops by suppliers. So a slight difference there. Now, we'll come back and have a look at specialist goods in a wee bit more detail later on. Perishable goods and food distribution is a great example of that. Now, when we're looking at our internal logistics, what we want to do here is make sure that the shops have the right amount of inventory at the right time. And we're told that Muddock's manages that really by road transportation. So we're looking at lorries here, and it will replenish shops with goods from its warehouses. So again, potentially, this is something that they do partially internally, and maybe we will see Daistruk doing that as well. Now, the outbound logistics are interesting here. Most sales are going to be direct to customers. So customers come to the store, they come to the supermarket, and they collect their own goods. However, as we've noted over here, Muddock Supermarkets takes an omni-channel approach. And what we mean there is they offer sales through their website as well. So the outbound logistics has to deal with deliveries to customers' homes as well. And this introduces a potentially interesting and I think quite likely exam day scenario. So we need to prepare ourselves to see some what we would call last mile delivery services. So typically that's with smaller vehicles, either trucks, vans or cars, and perhaps Daistruk will offer this last mile delivery service for Muddock. That would be from the shops or warehouses direct to customers' homes. Now, what I would say to have a look at here, what is quite topical, also fits in with CIMA's digital strategy, would be to have a look at the real world examples of drone delivery. So one that I've had a look at, I had a look at this a couple of years ago actually, but it's relevant here, is Amazon have explored, at least in the UK, looking at drone delivery, and the area that they looked at was Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes, if you know that area, if you know the UK, is relatively new in terms of a city and town and quite flat. And then maybe more suited to drone delivery. I've also worked with quite a lot of students from the Co-op supermarket, which is smaller corner stores in the UK, and they have also partnered with Amazon in having a look at these drone deliveries. So maybe search up a company that they've worked with called Starship Technologies. Again, you don't need to look at these in any massive detail, but it's great to have a look. I think it brings the case study alive, yeah? And it means that you will be more prepared where we see these scenarios coming up on exam day. So I think that's something that we want to have a look at. Fits with digital strategy, fits with their largest customer here. Now, another thing that we could look at with regard to the supermarkets, we've talked about perishable goods, but we know large supermarkets, they sell a lot of things. So perhaps we're going to have to look at efficient deliveries that can deliver food items. That might be ambient food items, might be frozen food items, it might be chilled food items and other things. So perhaps we need flexible deliveries that can deliver multiple different goods at once. Again, that will be cost effective, it will be environmentally friendly, and we will have a look at that later on when we looked at different types of delivery by truck and road and how we deal with that. So that again is something that we will pick up on. Okay, so I think a great page there giving us some practical examples and really underlining the different needs of different customers. So now that we've had an overview of the basics of logistics and we've had these examples, now let's start to have a look at the logistics industry. And initially, what is good news for us is we're told businesses spend a vast amount on logistics. So that's great. If we're a logistics company, we know that the market potential is there. Now, we're based in Rhineland currently, and we are told, this is a statistic that we can draw upon on exam day, the Rhinelandian businesses for the year ended 31st of December 22 have spent $226.2 billion on logistics. So again, that is something that shows the potential of the market. From a global perspective, here you can see that we have added in some global statistics as well. And again, if we were to have an exam day scenario that we were looking at moving outside of Rhineland, then again, this is a great statistic that you can show your real world knowledge. So based on our expert market research is the source that we have used, the global logistics market has reached a size of $9.96 trillion in 2022. And we can see that a lot of that growth is coming from online retail. So have that as a backdrop for opportunities for you, and you can draw upon that. Now let's have a look at the breakdown of that spend within Rhineland by function. And where we can use this, or where I would be expecting you to use this within your exam, is to help with that prioritization and significance of issues. So for example, if you were given an exam day scenario and it had a strategy around transportation or improving transportation, then you know that that is 58% of those costs. That would make a significant difference. However, if you were looking at something that was just administrative, then that's less significant, just 8%. So this is how we can use the statistics that we are provided with. So as you can see, the biggest cost is transportation. And we will walk you through all the different types of transportation, and we are given quite a lot of data. It's quite subtle data, but we can pull on it to have a look at different costs of transportation. One thing I would say there is this is financial cost, but remember, we need to think wider than that at a strategic level. So yes, costs are important, but also a key theme for this case study sitting will be sustainability, those ESG or environmental, social and governance issues as well. So we're not always necessarily going to go with the lowest short-term cost because our customers are going to expect us to build in environmental issues, and certainly investors will expect that as well. So just a little caveat on costs there. Inventory carrying, as we said, is a huge cost. That is about that supply chain management, making sure that we are holding enough to keep the process going. So for example, Multor Motors needs to have sufficient industry to keep the production process going, but doesn't want to incur high costs of carrying too much inventory. If we were to look at Muddock supermarkets, again, inventory carrying with perishable goods, they cannot hold those for too long. So again, very, very important inventory management costs there. Warehousing and storage itself, I was quite surprised at this one, actually, 11% of the cost, and then some administrative costs to make up the rest. Now we're going to have a look at how logistics within a company can be managed. And the big difference, to set the scene for what we do, is looking at that in-house or outsourced side of things. So as it says here, logistics can be managed in-house or outsourced. But what we're told, and it definitely fits with the real world knowledge from what I've seen so far, is very, very few large organizations will manage their own logistics. It is much more efficient for them to outsource that. And that's an opportunity that is great for us. Now, it is really important that you know the terminology within this box, okay? We're going to look at the difference between first-party logistics all the way up to fourth-party logistics here. And certainly, if you want to have a little look on YouTube, you will see lots of different videos explaining these different levels of logistic companies. I think one of the best ones that I have had a look at so far is a company called Ceresis. That begins with a C, C-E-R-A-S-I-S, Ceresis. And they had quite a good video with some diagrams as well. And it was entitled Third-Party Logistics versus Fourth-Party Logistics Explained. However, there are plenty of them, and I'm sure you'll be able to have a look at those. Now, a first-party logistics company, essentially, this is where the manufacturer, I'm using that as an example, transports its goods direct to the customer. In other words, it manages its own logistics. There is no middleman in between there. When we're looking at second-party logistics, this is the most basic level of outsourcing, and it tends to be where you're looking at outsourcing that transportation element. So between, let's say, a manufacturer and the customer, we put in the middle that transportation company. The most common ones that I have seen talked about, and certainly where Daistruk sits, is as a third-party logistics company. And as we'll see after the break, they offer a wide range of services to their customers. It can be anything from warehousing to inventory management to transportation. Okay, and we will look at more details of third-party logistics companies later, and then move on to have a look at what we do in Daistruk specifically. We also have fourth-party logistics, and fourth-party logistics are really an extension of that third-party logistics model. And the biggest difference that I can see is where they take responsibility for strategy. So they're not necessarily just carrying out clients' instructions, they're taking more of an active role, more of a partnership role with their customer. And fourth-party logistics companies may work or employ or outsource to other third-party logistics companies. And one potential exam day scenario, I think an obvious one, is that Daistruk would aim to move from a third-party logistics company to taking on a fourth-party logistics company. That might be in general, or it might be for one or more of their clients. And if you do want to look at a real world example, we have that over here. So Maersk is a fourth-party logistics company. Now, before I move on from this box, as part of my research, certainly a lot of it on YouTube, as well as McKinsey, is extending this. You will probably see reference to fifth-party logistics companies the more that you get into this industry. And they tend to be, I mean, clearly there's no one-off definition, but they tend to be around e-commerce or where they are providing that software that I mentioned. The software is their unique selling point. It is the complete solution that integrates or partners with their customers. So don't be surprised if you see fifth-party logistics companies. And again, is that something where we think Daistruk could have a competitive advantage to do that? Now, I really like this next part. We are going to see a couple of bullet points. I think there's 5 bullet points that large businesses would consider to look at the advantages of outsourcing their arrangements. So be aware of the general outsourcing upsides and downsides. You've been looking at that since you've done E1, but what we're doing here is we are personalizing these to having a look at our third-party logistics companies. Now, all of these, I think we could expect to draw into exam day scenarios. It helps us understand our customers' perspective and point of view, and our customers are going to be certainly key players for us. But as well as that, we can use these to refine further what we see as our critical success factors, what we see are areas of core competence where we can outperform the competition. So that's how I want you to use this list. First up, a outsource provider, a third-party logistics company, can provide expertise. So talent is going to be key. And I think this is a key theme for this case study, because a wide range of talent is needed. We need specialist drivers. We need specialists in software. You will see that there are certain legal skills, whether that be health and safety, whether it be import and export customs duties that are needed. And as you will see from your real world reading, as that develops, there is a talent shortage in certain areas. And I will pick up on a couple of those, but talent and expertise. So it's going to be interesting to see what Daistruk have, how we treat staff. Do we recognize risks around that? And when you look at the principal risks, you will see this is a key strategic issue for us. So really, really important, that talent and that expertise. Next up, and again, really, really important, is that if you use a third-party logistics company, then they provide essentially all of those assets that you need. So warehouses, vehicles, and what that means is that the client themselves doesn't have to invest in that property, plant, and equipment. So that's thinking about it from the customer's point of view. Let's think about it from our point of view, and over here from an F3 point of view. We have to invest. We have to invest in warehouses. We have to have all the different types of transportation that we need as well. So perhaps we need to have a look from an F3 point of view at sources of finance for this. The onus will be on Daistruk, the logistics company, to finance those larger capital investments. And potentially we could combine this with expanding outside of Roundland and the investment that would be required upfront by us at that stage as well. So very, very interesting. As we said, when we talked about critical success factors at the outset, and this definitely fits in with my real world reading, flexibility is required. So one of the unique selling points that I've seen, especially if we look at those McKinsey series of logistics disruptors, will be the flexibility that they offer. One company I looked at was even called Flex, because that's what they were really advocating. Clients might need to upscale or downscale their logistics at very short notice. So can the third-party logistics company do that? Are they very, very flexible? And I think software is going to be a key there, that information flow and having that software there. And again, everything here from these advantages, think about it from an E3 performance measurement point of view. Think about it from F3 in terms of KPIs and measures and that side of things as well. Okay. And before we move off this page, where we do, or where a customer does use either a third-party or fourth-party logistics company, then the client becomes highly, highly reliant on them. And therefore, I think it increases the pressure on that logistics company to maintain its reputation, look after the client, etc. And an interesting ethical question or governance question that could arise, and we see these quite a lot at case study, is if something does go wrong and we have an outsource arrangement, well, where does the responsibility lie? Does it lie with the customer's board? Because ultimately, the customer's board is responsible for everything that that customer's business does, or does it lie with the third-party provider? So from a legal point of view, we might need to look at the service level agreements. From an ethical point of view, it might come in, and then also recognizing that reputational risk and that side of things. So where we've seen this happen before is normally if there's some sort of disaster or something's gone wrong and we're looking at who is responsible. So a really interesting point to start to have a think of. Now let's have a look at some more advantages. Again, it's that one-shop stop side of things. We want our third-party logistics company to resolve any problems. So it talks here about the flow of goods. And if our third-party logistics company can resolve the problems, then that means that management in the client, at that customer, doesn't have to worry about it. So I thought when I saw this back to Motor Motors. We know that they will need to ship different goods and parts around those 31 countries and around those 52 factories. Perhaps if we take them on as a client and there's a problem in one aspect of logistics, then that flow of goods could be a significant problem. It could hold up production, and that would be awful for us reputationally, because it would cost our client so much in terms of lost production plans, production time rather, and the implications for their customers as well. So very important. And then the final one here is looking at legal activity. So tie this into what I said about talent. Some of the areas that we will see for legal activities will be licenses for forklift truck drivers, for certain road drivers, rail drivers. There are health and safety requirements to do with the storage of certain materials in terms of forklift trucks, quite a lot there, and in the operations of warehouses. And we will also see legal requirements with regard to customs duties and that side of things. So perhaps another question scenario that we might see is that Daistruk might decide to offer these legal services. Another thing that they may do is outsource that, so they could outsource that themselves and then provide it to customers. So lots and lots there. Now, recognize that these advantages are the ideal. And I think the examiner is giving us a little hint up here. They may not be realized in practice. So if something goes wrong, and if we're looking at a strategic implications question, then perhaps these advantages that we've looked at will help us come up with some strategic implications. It also says to watch out for things like flexibility at busy times in the year. So we may get seasonal variation in demand. Is that going to cause us a problem for storage space? And again, from an E3 point of view, using that information, that digital technology, will help us plan that storage space, plan for peaks and troughs better. I think it's going to be a key issue. Now let's have a look briefly at whether a client might want shared facilities or have some dedicated facilities from its third-party logistics provider. We are told clients sometimes want to negotiate exclusive arrangements, and therefore this is something that we might see on exam day. Are we going to see a client, might be Multor Motors, might be Muddock Supermarkets, might be another one coming along and asking for exclusive or dedicated arrangements? So what does this mean? In terms of transport, it might be that our trucks or vehicles are painted in the client's colours. What is the implication of that? Well, I think from a P3 scenario over here, again, sounds like we're being very pessimistic all the time. If something goes wrong, that is going to increase reputational risk for our client if that transportation is painted up with their logo and their colours, for example. So that's something we need to prepare for. Also, it may mean that there is some dedicated warehouse space that is set aside for that client's exclusive use. Now, one would imagine this is going to cost our client more if they're doing that, but would give that client more certainty. Another thing that we need to think about is if we do have exclusive arrangements, then it may mean that there can be less shared servicing in terms of transport. So it might be less environmentally friendly. Perhaps we are going to see truckloads or other transportation that isn't completely full. And environmental friendliness is absolutely key. Sustainability is going to be a key issue here. So that's something else to build in. Now, we're told that shared arrangements don't guarantee the client exclusive use of those assets, for example. So I'm thinking maybe we'll see an exam day scenario here where we have agreed exclusive use, but maybe there's a systems problem or an information or communication problem, and maybe that dedicated arrangements or exclusive use isn't available there. And for any client, dedicated arrangements can be more cost effective. And that is going to apply where we have a high volume of goods. So those vehicles and that storage space is at capacity, or it might be more cost effective where there are specialized needs. And here again, this makes me think of Muddock supermarkets. So they are likely to have a high volume of goods, and the specialized needs would be with regard to, for example, food, perishable goods. But the supermarket might also supply things like fuel, petrol, again, and that would be specialized needs. So maybe that's an example where we might see dedicated arrangements there. And from a stakeholder point of view, where we do have those exclusive arrangements, then it does increase the power of that customer over the logistics provider. However, I would widen that out. And one thing that's always good to think about is think about the power balance between Daistruk and the provider. So if they are using us for exclusive arrangements, that's, you know, they are powerful over us. They'll be an important customer, maybe cash flow, revenue stream coming through. However, that would show more integration of our services with their business. Does that make it harder for them to switch? So looking at that negotiating stance, that power balance, is often something that we will see in strategic case study exams as well. So I am going to take a little bit of a break there, because I'm sure you have had loads and loads of information coming at you. We'll have a little break. So if you do need to have a comfort break or step away, we'll have a break for about 10 minutes. I will be looking at some of the questions that have come up to the extent that I can ask them. I'll do that. And then when we come back after the break, we'll have a look at storage and transportation. And then we'll get on and have a look at Daistruk as well. So I'm just going to open the chat box so I can have a little look and see if there are any questions for me to date, or if you do have any, by all means, pop them in. So I'll just go back so I can see one for Thomas there, another one for Thomas. Lots for Thomas so far. And I can see Thomas responding as well. Yes, Nada, you said about the global logistics market size at 9.96 trillion. That would be in US dollars. So that's good that you've asked that to clarify that. Definitely lots of potential there. Real world examples of fifth party logistics companies. Obviously, it depends on how the company wishes to define themselves. What I would say, and again, I'm at the infancy of my research here, I've had a look at the series of logistics disruptors from McKinsey. So there were a couple of companies within that. Flex was one that I looked at, like I said, that builds itself on that complete software solution. I would say it would argue that it was a fifth party logistics company. And also, interestingly, I might mention them later on, Uber Freight. So we know Uber, huge technology giant, and they talk about a lot of gaps in the system where things get cancelled and capacity, and they're bringing their technology to that solution. And again, I think it's there, like I say, there's no set definition, but what I've seen so far is those that are more digitized, that are relying on digital technology, and those related to e-commerce as well. So have a look at that McKinsey series. I think that's been really entertaining for me. Oh no, so some pessimistic details here about maybe getting ready for some reset. Hopefully not. Oh, that's so nice. A comment about the in-depth approach. I do really like to get into it, and definitely that develops as I go through. So I'll be keeping my fingers crossed for you then on exam day there as well. And then Rachel, you're doing the same. Well, I definitely got my fingers crossed for you, Rachel. For sure. I quite like this pre-scene. I don't know what you think. Let me know what you think about the company. I was chatting with some other tutors and they were going, oh, logistics, a bit boring. But I actually quite like it. I think there's loads that they could test. So in a case where proposals for Multor Motors to become our suppliers, what issue would we need to consider? Right, excellent question there. So, I mean, ultimately, I think it's going to depend on the exam day scenario. But for me, initially, I'm thinking where we use road transportation, one of the key threats, and we'll see this when we look at the principal risks in the next webinar, and you will see it from your reading, would be from an environmental point of view. I think we're at risk of a change in legislation. We know that we're seeing this in domestic driving as well. So certainly in the UK, they're looking at banning diesel motors. There is a lot of government intervention to encourage the use of electric vehicles and the infrastructure around that. And when we look at logistics companies, so for example, Amazon, have made a big deal about having or aiming for an electric fleet of vehicles, and other logistics companies have done that as well. That's where I think potentially we would look at working with a supplier for those more environmentally friendly road transportation. However, we can also sometimes get some bunker ball stuff within strategic case study as well, and we might look at that autonomous self-driving vehicle, although maybe I'm too close-minded and I can't see that happening anytime soon. It could be something that we might see in partnership. Again, when we look at road transportation, it's huge for our logistics operation. It's huge for all logistics companies, but we're on an island in Roundland, so it's really important for us as well. So that's what I might think, but I am open to suggestions of anything else that you may see as well. And Kat, you weren't a fan of the heat pumps and boilers. I have to say, personally, I like this one more than our previous case study was on heat pumps and boilers. Oh, that's so nice to hear my analysis. My children, as anyone who's worked with me before, will know that my kids often tell me that I am part robot, but I think there's a good place for being analytical, and definitely my approach to case study. So for those of you that want to join on with the webinars or join in the elite group, it is all about building those skills. There's nothing really that I say, oh, you need to learn that off by heart. If you don't have that fact, the whole thing will come tumbling down. But it is essential that you build skills. So all the things that I'm saying about exam day scenarios, or have a think about this, or have a little look and read about the industry, that's all about layering up those skills. The more that you can think about it and practice, rehearse, prioritize, have that backdrop from the pre-scene, but also from your industry reading, then you'll be ready. And the single biggest piece of advice that I can give, and the examiner echoed this recently actually, is to do mock exams. The mock exams will test where you are. And I suggest that you do a mock exam and then either look at the model solutions or have it marked, depending on what type of program or approach you've decided to take. Analyze how you've done, do a gap analysis, reflect on that, and then put it into the next mock and keep repeating that process. And I think that makes a difference. So our examiner, recently, they said a couple of things for success. They said pre-scene. So that's why we're going into it in so much detail today, and we'll do it in that second pre-scene webinar. They say you need to know that pre-scene inside out. And they also said that you need to do mock exams and practice those. And the other thing that they said is all about application. Now, application is a skill, and that is application to the pre-scene, but also more importantly is application to the exam scenario. One thing, again, if you've worked with me before, you'll know I say all the time, if you're busy typing your answer and you're not using the information that you're seeing in the scenario or the unseen material, I would be a wee bit worried. You're more likely to have gone off track. You're not making your answer specific enough. And again, all skills, we want to have that there. It's very, very much a skills-based exam. I think it's quite interesting as well, Gloria, just having a look at this. And the more you get into it, you'll probably notice the more and more enthusiastic I get as we go through the course. it does become more interesting, and I like doing a mixture of reading. I like doing a mixture of watching videos and that side of things, and even sometimes, Joe, if I've got 5 or 10 minutes, I certainly don't think that every video I look at or every article that I look at, I don't have to learn it off by heart. It's about having that natural interest. So if you've got that, Gloria, that's spot on, because I think we remember things more. And then, you know, you might find yourself in an exam day scenario where you remember that. So is there an option to purchase just the second part of this webinar? Now, Alice, Thomas would be a better one for this. So you might want to double check by emailing info@viva tuition.com. But I think the way you can do that is just have a look at that. I think that sort of the most basic package, which would include the second part of the pre-SEAM webinar, as far as I know. But you should find details on the website there. This is all being recorded, and as Thomas said, for everyone who is a participant today, that will be emailed to you. Then, if you decide to come on to one of our programs, you will have access to this. It will be uploaded there, as well as the annotated materials as well. So everyone will get access to this as a recording, which hopefully is helpful. And then if you're on a program, you will, you'll be able to access that through our little Circle app and have the materials as well. And oh, that's so nice, Tatiana, to say you thought logistics would be boring. That's good. Well, hopefully we'll keep it up. You may change your mind once we start to look at storage and methods of transportation. I thought, wee bit dry, but I think, again, if we bring in that digital aspect, and again, if once we've looked through that information, it sets the context for Daistruk as well. That's great. So how many corrections of mock exams are included? They get marked once. So you do them, they go off to the marker. The marker isn't me. Viva work with a team of markers. Though obviously if you're on the elite course and there's anything you want to chat about with your mark script, we can do that. And then they get marked once. I tend to set a rough timetable if you're in the elite group, just so that you've done the mock before the relevant workshop. However, it's not the end of the world if you don't, because obviously everyone has different commitments and that side of things, but it just it does get marked once. But then if you're in elite and we have a debrief around that, that's where you get to ask as many questions as you like about, so I put this, what should I have put, or would you have given this merit? And sometimes it's often around just a little tweak on that to keep it in the scenario. Should we be using real-world application now? Sangeeta, this is an absolutely excellent question. Really, really excellent question. One thing the examiner said recently is they didn't want to see, how should I say, they didn't use these words, so I'm paraphrasing, but clunky reference to real-world examples. You can bring them in where they are relevant, but you don't necessarily have to, like I say, make those clunky references. For me, where those real world examples come in is it gives me confidence in the exam. I find it gives me the terminology or the lingo to make my answer sound like it is from a senior finance manager within a third-party logistics company. And, for example, a nice natural real-world example would be, let's say Daistruk was having a look at some software, and it was going to be proprietary software to enable flexibility, and we are looking at, is it viable? Is this something customers want? Well, then maybe it would be relevant for me to say, well, you know, I have researched some other companies such as Flex, that's what they offer. It seems to be matching up with that. So you can mention examples there. It does add depth to your score, but what the examiner has said is they've got to be, like I say, more natural and relevant references. You will get credit for them, but not clunky references. And that's the feedback I would give to students. So another example, we just talked about that last mile delivery and drones. your answer would be stronger if you could give some reference to the fact that other, let's say, retailers in other jurisdictions have done this and how it's gone. So, you might mention the example that I had about Co-op trialed it out. You might reference companies like, I always want to say Starship Enterprises, but I don't mean that, Starship Technologies, that have done that. And like I say, it shows your knowledge of the industry. And my rule of thumb is, would you naturally mention that if you were in the workplace, if you work for Daistruk, if you were reporting to the board, if it would be a natural reference, then I think it's appropriate. If it's not a natural reference, then don't go for that. What the examiner said is sometimes students would be better placed focusing on the scenario itself and application to the scenario. So that's something that you can experiment. I like to read a lot about the industry though, because it makes me more confident. I feel that I understand the scenarios better that way. So that hopefully will help balance that out with the case study. And also that should give you comfort. It's not like you have to read everything and memorize everything. Just develop a natural interest and read through those. So should we mention electric vehicles at any point? I think, Magdalena, that electric vehicles is a hot topic for this. I would say it's a key issue. You would mention it in a scenario that was relevant to that, or for example, if you were asked to think about ways in which the transportation could be more sustainable, then electric vehicles would be one aspect of that. We will have a look at comparing road and rail transportation, and we will and that would do it. So I like the 2 mile thing, the 1 mile thing. Yes, definitely. And I think that combines knowledge of the importance of sustainability for our institutional investors, and therefore for us, for our customers, what consumers are demanding, technology, and also what we're seeing in terms of real world application there as well. So it is something that I would have a look at. And again, think about the government of Roundland. We're going to have a look at those being a really key player. In order for electric vehicles to work, we need the support of the government. They've got to be those electric charging points to make that viable. This is what I like about case study. Nothing is ever simple. It is more complex. We've got to think about things from a range of perspectives and bring those in as well. Okay, so that's what we're having a little look at there. Right, so what I will do now, obviously I don't want to keep you way over time, probably take about another 45 minutes to finish this off. It is being recorded though, if anyone is under time pressure, and then I will bob up at the end, have a look at any other questions that you have, and then let you get on with your weekend. So we're going to have a look at storage, we're going to have a look at transportation, and then we'll just start to have a little look at Daistruk as well. We'll see how far we get, and then the rest will be covered in that second webinar. Okay, so I shall just take a little drink before we get back, in case I have a coughing fit. Oh, such nice comments. It's going to make my day. So thank you very much for that, Magdalena. I do love it. It's by far and away my favorite thing to teach case study as well. Okay, right. So I shall get rid of me. And now we will start to have a talk about storage. Okay, so to finish off our general industry overview, we're going to have a look at storage, and we're going to have a look at transport. Potentially a wee bit dry. You might not be thinking this is going to spark much interest. However, we must understand these as a backdrop, because if we were to put anything in our answer that didn't fit with this, as I said, this is the minimum level of knowledge that we need to have. So let's have a look at storage to start off with. Now, as you can imagine, storage is going to be a vital aspect in logistics. And if you want to start to use some of the lingo, in terms of what I've seen so far, we refer to different areas of storage as nodes, or I've seen some companies refer to them as dots. They talk about joining up the dots, but nodes, N-O-D-E-S, seems tends to be by far and away the most frequent reference. Now, when we're looking at storage, we are looking at warehousing, but we can look at other forms of storage. And the picture here is quite useful when we look at seaports later on, or inland ports as well. Some forms of storage are just in these shipping containers, and they're robust enough to be stored and stacked on land. So two aspects of storage there. And remember, what we're trying to achieve overall is about having that safe storage. Safety in terms of things like, I don't know, theft, but also making sure that goods are not damaged. Now, a key aspect when we come to storage and we look at the investment that Daistruk would need to make is about the number, size, and location of those storage facilities. And clearly, the number, size, and location is going to be extremely impactful. To start off with, from an F3 point of view, this is going to require heavy investment, and heavy investment increases our risk. And that investment will be in the PPE itself. But when we look at storage in more detail, we'll see that robotics is used a lot as well. And that goes hand in hand with the software that we were talking about to manage the whole system. So it is risky in terms of investment, and we have to think about how we would finance that as well. Another key issue when we look at the location and size of these storage facilities is with regard to the environmental, social, and governance aspect, ESG, and I'm talking about the environmental aspect. So locations will massively affect the transportation costs between these nodes, as I said. And ideally, we want to minimize the cost, but also the environmental aspect of those as well. Now, when we're looking at storage facilities, these can be configured and also equipped to handle different types of goods. And I think, again, think about different customers having different needs. Think about the need for flexibility. So we will see that Daistruk has a number of warehouses and also operates warehouses that are owned by its clients. And how does it equip these to meet that flexibility? One of the things that I think is going to be definitely an exam day scenario is having a look at forklift trucks. Now, there's a couple of aspects that we need to have a look at here. In any particular storage facility, we need to talk about the loading docks and how they are set out, and they can make the whole process so much more efficient. You can see that we have a picture here and that there are certain loading docks, warehouses with loading docks to make it easy for forklift trucks to put goods into the vehicles and also take goods out of those vehicles. Now, some of my more less pleasant, shall we say, research to date has been around the safety of forklift trucks. And in the second pre-scene analysis, we'll see a news story at the end that does talk about the training and the licensing required for forklift trucks. And if I would encourage you to do some research on the safety issues around the industry. Because the warehouse space itself is supposed to have dedicated walkways and spaces that allow people that are working within the warehouse to move around safely. And there can be multiple dangers of forklift trucks. So them tipping over, them dropping loads that are very high, and other some quite distressing injury to the driver or other people. So I think it's something that we need to have a look at. And if we're thinking at it from a P3 point of view, internal audit is another area that gets tested all the time. So make sure that you know the purpose of internal audit, make sure you know good governance around internal audit, and know the basics of controls to mitigate risks. What I would do to prepare as well, do your thinking before the exam, is think about some of the controls that you would put in place around safe usage of forklift trucks in storage facilities. Okay, so a very, very important area. Now, when we're looking at this configuration and when we're looking at loading docks, again, this links in with types of transportation. So our storage facilities and choice of transportation, they're not mutually exclusive. And you can, as we'll see, design different trucks with different types of siding or tops. And a common one we'll see, it's referenced later in the pre-scene, are trucks with what we call curtain sides. So they're quite robust curtains, but you can move those across, and that can make side loading an awful lot easier, and that can speed up the process of how we get goods into and out of trucks as well. Now, picking up on the configuration and how we choose to lay things out, warehouses can be configured with different types of racks. And again, for me, this is all about flexibility. So what goods are we storing in that warehouse? Can we change the needs of that warehouse quite quickly? Automation is going to be definitely, I would say, a hot topic. And that would go from the basics of conveyor belts to actually looking at things like the use of robots. And that brings in, again, you can see how much of a theme our E3 and our digital technology is here. And we can look at automation solutions that help with flexibility, help with accuracy, but also looking after staff and reducing the number of workplace accidents. I would encourage you to have a look at some real world examples here. So, for example, I think Amazon is known in its warehouses for using robotics. So have a look at its picking arm. It's called the Sparrow. And way back in 2012, again, very well-known fact that Amazon made a strategic acquisition at that stage of Kiva Systems. So it bought the Kiva robots that work in those warehouses as well. And actually this week, I was quite excited. I was having a look at my BBC News app, and by some miracle, warehouse automation came up, and I was having a look at individuals working in those warehouses, lifting boxes and moving them around. And a company had designed exoskeletons. So it was like a backpack that the individuals were wearing that helped them lift and move things. It made them stronger and also protected their back. And I think, because logistics is huge, the growth of that online delivery, online shopping and delivery, we're going to see a lot more technology. Again, you don't need to know everything, but have a look, get a feel for some of the things that Daistruk might want to have a look at. So as I've just said, oftentimes this automation is about that fulfillment of online sales. And I think as well, that brings in some ethical issues. There are certain advantages and disadvantages to automation, that idea of an augmented workforce, but I'm sure that you have seen plenty in the press about the treatment of staff in certain warehouses, whether that be from the staff's point of view and how they say they're treated, or from a company's point of view. And another thing that we're seeing, which I think is a real live issue, would be with regard to unionization of certain warehouse staff. So Amazon, again, would be quite a high profile example. Just have an awareness there. Again, I think that talent and staff is a key issue and something that we want to have a look at. So upsides and downsides of automation. Another really interesting area for storage is about specialized facilities. And I find this really interesting to look at. So they mention a couple of things here, like liquid storage tanks or grain or for crops. But if you have a look at CIMA Logistics, as I said, it's one that I've had a look at in more detail. CIMA Logistics have their own YouTube channel, so by all means go and have a look at that. And they had some very specialized full logistics side of things and storage, and one of those was with regard to lithium batteries. They call it CIMA Battery Solutions, and they say that these have to be stored and transported using specialist systems. So that was of interest. And also another really interesting one that I would encourage you to have a look at, which might be relevant to Murdoch supermarkets, would be have a look at CIMA's Chill Hub. So this is a cold storage facility, a specialized cold storage facility, and it's located near a port in England within about an hour of London. And again, there's a video about 5-6 minutes to watch, which will give us an indication of some of these specialized storage facilities. Now, as well as looking after certain goods, there would be safety concerns. So this is setting us up for potentially an exam day scenario where something goes wrong. So maybe flammable or toxic materials, or potentially hygiene issues with food, anything intended for human consumption. So make sure that you are ready to have a look at an exam day scenario, avoiding that. You may have to look at the strategic implications of that, and then maybe look at managing reputational risk. You may have to look and explain the share price reaction, that side of things there as well. Okay, so storage, lots and lots for you to have a look at there. Now we're going to have a look at the different forms of transport. So we're going to look at road, rail, sea, air, and intermodal transport. Intermodal transport is where we're looking at more than one form of transport. Now, before we look at road, let's have a look at expenditure on transportation by mode. As always, when we see these pie charts of information, I'm expecting you to use these to help prioritize and look at the significance of issues. So the biggest one is road. That is the most popular one at the moment. Then we have sea, transportation next. We will see that Roundland is an island, so the sea is very important. Then we have air and rail being broadly equivalent. Air just ahead there. Now, what I would encourage you to do is have a little bit of a look at each of these modes of transport. Again, if you want to, I've had a look at CIMA Logistics, and on their YouTube channel, they have short videos of all of these different types of transport. So I thought that was quite a good introduction for me. I want you to consider the cost of these transport methods, have a think about the environmental impact, think about the time it takes to move goods around, think about the different types of goods that you would have, that would be more suitable to each of these, and also think about flexibility. So if you can do that, then I think those will be skills that will make you nice and agile and ready for anything in the exam. As well, think about what could go wrong with each of these. So for example, here we have road transportation that can be unreliable. So any of you that live in the UK, you know that we suffer from congestion. So road transportation can be unreliable because of traffic, because of weather conditions, and think about the knock-on effect that that would have for our customers within our logistics. When we think about sea, think about things like in 2021, we had the Suez Canal, and that caused a massive problem for logistics in terms of things being brought in by ship. In terms of air travel, well, that almost stopped to a halt when it came to COVID, but also we had disasters. I think it was way back in 2011, we had that ash cloud from Iceland, and that stopped air travel for a couple of days. And for rail travel as well, that's an interesting one. It's going to be heavily dependent on the government. But also, again, a UK example, we're having strike action on the rail in the UK at the moment, and that's also impacting on freight trains as well. So be prepared to have a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of all of those. So I will give you a quick run through what we have here. So let's start off with our cars and vans. So these are efficient and obviously are designed for small loads. We've already talked about that last mile and the importance of that. And if you do want to have a look at last mile retailers and logistic companies, then UPS and FedEx would be an example of those. Now, the advantages of cars and vans is that our drivers don't have to have special licenses. And therefore, in terms of that talent issue, it is a little bit more simplified in terms of recruitment and retention. One thing that you might want to have a look at there is the gig economy for drivers. So do we employ our drivers or do we have them on a self-employed basis? And there are upsides and downsides of both of those. But retaining drivers is an industry-wide problem. I'm going to talk about that in more detail when we look at truck drivers, because there's an awful lot more to say on that. Okay, so that is cars overall, and we've already talked about an exam day scenario where we might decide to buy a last mile delivery company, or maybe we would grow that organically. Now, when it comes to trucks, we will be looking at rigid trucks and articulated trucks. So rigid trucks, they have a chassis and then a cab for the driver, and then a separate load compartment. And one thing that I didn't know is that a manufacturer will supply the chassis and the cab, and then a separate third party will provide the load compartment. Now, this load compartment here, we've already talked about a little bit. It can be made with curtain sides, so it could be more flexible in terms of loading and unloading, depending on the type of warehouse or storage facility that we have. And we've also talked about whether this would be personalized. So it's blank here, but if we had a dedicated arrangement, maybe it would have the customer's brand or colors on that. We talked about the implications of that from a reputational point of view. In terms of cost and environmental friendliness, we can tailor the inside of these as well. So for example, we do see some refrigerated load compartments or chilled ones. So if we were doing something for Muddock supermarkets, we might have part of that load compartment being refrigerated, part ambient, and therefore we could make single deliveries with multiple different types of goods, and that would be cost effective as well as environmentally effective. Now we have some data here, and again, it doesn't set the world on fire at the moment, but this is something that I would want to be aware of in case it became relevant. So Rhinelandian law says that we can drive trucks of up to 7.5 tons with a standard driving license. However, when we're looking at larger trucks, we need that heavy goods vehicle. So again, from P3 and internal controls, how do we make sure that the right driver with the right permit is using the right truck? And the most popular truck size, we're told, is 18 tons. So that would require that heavy goods license. Again, talent shortage there, which I will talk about shortly. And a potential exam day scenario, maybe we want to look at replacing our fleet of trucks with an electric fleet of trucks and vans. And I've also said about Maltor Motors perhaps there. Now, instead of rigid trucks, we can have articulated trucks. So in terms of branding and part loads and all of that, it is exactly the same. Maybe an exam day scenario is about autonomous driving. We've already mentioned that. Now, when we're looking at our articulated trucks, these have a single tractor unit and also a trailer. And again, something that I didn't know before is these are separate, and the tractor unit, which essentially has the driver's cab and the fuel storage as well, that can be detached from the trailer and pick up another trailer. So they are designed to be interchangeable. And this is great. This makes it super flexible and aids efficiency for us as well. Again, as I said, these can be personalized to suit different types of cargo, and that can help then from being cost effective, time effective, but also from that environmental point of view. As we've already said, drivers of these trucks are going to need that heavy goods vehicle license. So again, having a look at a P3 point of view and controls, perhaps bringing in internal audit in terms of making sure that that risk is mitigated. I've mentioned the government a couple of times, and the common exam day scenario that we see is sometimes our company that we're looking at does something that will raise interest of the government. So if there is a problem with drivers who don't have the appropriate licenses, then we may need to take action before government steps in and has a look at that. Okay, now this is a really live issue here. Drivers are hard to retain and employ. So I would have a read around this. In the UK in particular, and forgive me for talking about the UK a lot, post-Brexit and post-COVID, this is a really live issue. And back in 21, I think October 21, round about that, the government actually had to intervene and issued 5,000 special visas for lorry drivers. However, it wasn't particularly successful. They didn't have anywhere near that number of applications. And at the time, I was reading about various different companies and the impact of the companies on this shortage of lorry drivers. So these would be our customers. So Nando's, my favorite chicken restaurant, for example, they actually offered some of their own staff to help with supply chain issues because of these shortages within the supply chain. And there's another UK company, Arla Foods, and it makes milk deliveries to supermarkets and other chilled deliveries. And again, they cited lorry driver shortages as a reason for not being able to meet the needs of their clients and supermarkets. So it really, really is a live issue, and it's a complex issue. When you read around it, I think the Road Haulage Association in the UK that estimated 100,000 shortage of qualified drivers. So this, if it's the same in Rhineland, would be a really, really important issue. And also another thing to have a look at, and I knew this from having a look at some pieces a couple of years ago, the average age of lorry drivers is increasing. So in the UK, currently the Road Haulage Association says the average age of a driver is 55 years, and they need to attract those younger drivers. So it's about looking at better terms and conditions, and really they want recognition of the vital role they play in the economy. Now, for me, this isn't something that Daistruk could solve on its own. I think it's an interesting area where government would need to get involved as well, because it is so important to the economy. So drivers, a really, really interesting issue on our articulated trucks. And continuing on with drivers, these tractor units have a sleeping compartment, and that brings in another really live and topical issue. Could be very interesting because it would cover things like ethics, it would cover law, it would cover our values as a business. So there's a risk that drivers could become exhausted due to excessive hours. And think about the implications of that. Think about the increased risk, not only to the driver, but to the safety of those around them. And maybe we are going to get a scenario about a conflict between driver shortages and then the law and regulation on breaks and how much drivers can work. So I would encourage you to have a look at the rules around driver working hours. So I've had a look at the UK. I'm UK based, so that's why I've decided to have a look at that, again, on the government website. Now, it does depend on the type of vehicle, but from what I saw, for these larger vehicles, they are allowed no more than 10 hours driving time per day. And thinking about it from a P3 point of view and data collection, they have to record on weekly record sheets by law how long they have been driving, or there's a device that can be fitted to the vehicle called a tachograph, and that records speeds, it records distance, it records drivers' activity. So it'll be interesting to see what the Rhinelandian laws are around this, and maybe are we going to see a change in the law? We may also have pressure from Daistruk's drivers. We'll see later on they employ 7,000 drivers. So I think there's a lot to look at there, and I think it goes beyond just the simple transportation, the cost, the efficiency, and the time. There's a really complex issue there. Now, when we look at rail, there are a lot of benefits of rail listed, and these are really around, a lot of them are around sustainability. So it's generally more sustainable. It reduces congestion on the roads. It can be more reliable for being on time, which is obviously vital to us. And as well as being more sustainable, it can be cheaper because we can look at delivering things in bulk. Now, make sure that you have a look at sustainability. That can be reporting for logistics companies themselves, or have a look at the requirements of certain customers. You might want to have a look at a supermarket in your jurisdiction. What do they say about sustainability in their supply chain? That would help us understand Muddock supermarkets a bit more. Also, have a look at what some institutional investors say about sustainability. So you can pick any institutional investor. I tend to look at Hermes International, for example. You could look at BlackRock, and you will see lots of information of what they require from their boards on sustainability. That would impact us directly, but also impact our customers as well. It is possible to have a large range of products with rail, and there are different types of configurations and wagons. Again, they can be adapted for special loads. Now, the usefulness of rail is dependent on a number of things. So we have all the advantages here, which we need to know. But actually, a couple of caveats here. The usefulness largely depends on the location of the facilities, and that's for loading and unloading. Now, we will see we have 35 warehouses, so it'll be interesting to see where these are located. And maybe there will be opportunity for more acquisitions of warehouses with locations near rail. We'll also see that we own a number of dry ports for rail locations and storage as well. Now, we're told Rhineland has an extensive network of rail land, so it is a viable and possible transportation for us. And we're told that there are several rail operators, but because it says we have that rail network and it's going to be that national rail network, up here, I think this is interesting here. So think about from a risk management point of view and the development maybe of a private company rail infrastructure. How would that impact our business? And again, it underlines the government or local councils as being absolutely key stakeholders for us. Now, in line with looking at the government, a common question that we might get from an ethics point of view is around lobbying, for example. So is it ethical for a company like Daistruk to lobby a government for more rail lines? Now, where you see any ethics questions, my top tips for you would be to think about those 5 fundamental principles. So clearly, if we look at objectivity here, we have a self-interest, and that is something that we would need to manage. In terms of integrity, we would want to be open and honest, especially with regard to the use of data. And from professional behaviour, any lobbying would have to follow the laws. So a common question on ethics and lobbying there, we're just using one example here of our rail. Now, moving on to C, as we said, C can have its problems. Here we mentioned the Suez Canal, which we said, and Rhineland is a large island, so sea is absolutely vital to us. Sometimes there are no alternatives, and certainly if we're on an island, that will be the case. Now, again, we're given an example here of a different location, Northland, and we're told that Rhineland imports large quantities of grain from Northland, and then that is transferred to various different bakeries, etc. So again, I'm thinking Muddock supermarkets here, potentially a problem with them having their supplies. Will they be expecting us to solve their problems and do that? Different bulk carriers can have different types of holds and different types of specialized equipment. Again, we are seeing this aspect for all of our different modes of transport, that specialization that brings risks of investment, but also maybe opens up new markets to us. And as always, when we're looking at any specialized equipment, we would need to think about the financing of that. Now, generally speaking, sea is seen to be more environmentally friendly, certainly more than air. But we have seen some environmental problems with that as well. So, for example, back in 2010, have a look at the BP oil spill and how they handled it. One thing that's really interesting is, yes, there's the spill itself, but it is worthwhile taking a brief look at the fallout and reputational risk after that. And it was seen to be that lack of reactiveness of BP that was a big problem there. So again, something to learn from that. So maybe if we're transporting oil, that is a risk that we might see. And as always, what we may see is that we decide to invest in ships or a sea freight company. That is not something that we own at the moment. Now, container ships, we've had a look at the pictures before of those shipping containers. We know that they come in various different standard sizes, and the advantage of those is that they can be stacked. Standard sizes make for efficiency. They can be stacked on ships, on rail, and on land as storage as well. And one thing that I want you to have a look at, and it is hinted at towards the end of the precinct, when we have a look at the news articles is you can, or there are rather huge automated cranes that can lift these containers off ships, off rail, and put them into storage patterns. And one of the ones that I had a look at, again on YouTube, was the world's first fully automated port. And that was in Rizhao in East China. So from October 21. And again, it boasts that it can go from 2 minutes from it being on the ship to being on a truck. And there were 22 cranes overall, controlled by only 4 operators. So again, I think something that is of interest, and as I say, we'll pick up on this in the news article at the end and have a look at what Daistruk is doing in that space. Ships, as always, you can imagine, are flexible means of transport for export. As well as having shipping containers on ships, we can have our articulated trucks being on there. And now we get a little bit more detail from Roundland. We're told that there are 6 major ferry ports in Roundland's south and east coast. So again, that is a fact that we might need to draw upon in a scenario. And also, when we're looking at any imports and exports, this applies to shipping, but it also applies to air. Most third-party logistics companies will also manage the documentation that goes around imports and exports. So again, that is a specific skill, specific talent that we would need to have. And I'm thinking, do we do that all through human labor? Do we look at any sort of automation or AI around that very specialized skill there as well? And if we were to maybe outsource or use overseas suppliers to help with this, then a very commonly tested area is with regard to currency risk. So we may then be exposed to dealing in foreign currencies because we're working with either overseas customers or suppliers. And that, again, currency risk is something that comes up all the time in case studies. So you need to know the different types of currency risk, and you need to be able to talk about sensible solutions to those, and again, very much tailoring it to the scenario information. Now, something that you would think may not come up in case study, but expect the unexpected, is again, it's not usual, but it's not uncommon sometimes for ships to be captured by criminals. So it's happened many times in the past. What would we do in this scenario? So again, it is something for the safety of goods, for individuals, etc., that Daistruk would need to be ready for. Okay, let's have a look at air now. So air freight obviously can take many different forms. So we can look at dedicated cargo aircraft, or what we can have is space within passenger aircraft. So they carry a lot. Now, when we look at the types of goods that are suited to air, and again, this is one thing that I encourage you to have a think about, what types of goods are suited to different methods of travel. For air travel, we are looking at either high value goods. That's because of the cost of that. We're looking at goods that are smaller. So think back to Multor Motors. We were using C because, again, probably too large for air. Perishable goods are suited to air as well. And we've got a statistic down here. So 10% by weight of air freight coming into Roundland is fresh fruit and vegetables. So again, that perishable side of things, and makes us think of Muddock supermarkets there as well. Or anything that's urgent would be suited to air travel as well. So that's the type of goods that we might see. And let's think about some of the drawbacks of air. One would be cost. So we have a statistic for you here from the World Bank that air freight is 12 to 16 times more expensive than sea freight. So that is something that we would need to build in. But as well as the cost, we've got the environmental side of things as well. So we have a UK DEFRA study here saying that a plane will create 44 times more CO2 than a ship. Again, that could be a problem for us, and it also might be a problem for our customers as well. If you want to have a real world example of air travel, again, have a look at CIMA Logistics on their YouTube site, and you will see they have sky capacity. That's what they call it. So it's a global air network, and they have relationships with 11 major airports. So again, that's something that we would want to have for our air travel. And just as with other forms of travel, they can offer customers guaranteed spots or place spots as you need them. And they actually offer 3 levels of service. There's air value, air premium, and when it's really urgent, they have air now. And another thing I would just point out here, it works for air and shipping, ties in with the software. CIMA have software, an app, it's called My CIMA. It's a digital platform, and again, very, very useful for their customers to book spaces and transportation efficiently on that as well. Now, to finish off, having a look at air, where we have cargo aircraft that is only designed to carry freight. And normally that is larger items that are required to go urgently, but can also be where we have high value items such as electronics that need to go quickly and securely. So again, maybe an example there to watch out for in terms of an exam day scenario as well. It can go on passenger aircraft. And interestingly, it says most air freight goes in the hold of passenger aircraft. What you can do as well is work with some third-party specialists, and that would be where you had more complicated air freight needs. So perhaps that goes beyond our skill base, and we decide to work with a third-party provider there. We would need to think about the strategic implications of outsourcing some of our work, just the normal things that we would be there. So I would be expecting questions here on the tension between the need for speed and the environmental side of things. Maybe as well, it could be a potential acquisition. Do we want to buy so cargo ships, or do we want maybe to buy an air company, or perhaps have a look at buying in this specialist skill? And then to finish off our transport overview, let's just have a look at intermodal transport. Now, intermodal transport, as it says at the outset here, is just where we have 2 or more modes of transport, and we are an intermodal company. So it really is necessary when we are in Roundland because we are on an island. And when we look at the services that we offer, it is going to be all of the different transport side of things. Now, I've already talked about shipping containers that can be stacked on land. So we've got details of those there. And again, these shipping containers, as with everything else, can be bespoke. We can have refrigerated ones, air conditioning and other systems, depending on what we are carrying. Now, what are some of the advantages of intermodal transport? Essentially, we can be faster, it can be more rapid, and it can be more efficient than when it comes to a single mode of transport. And again, I want you to think about the entire system. It doesn't just depend on where our storage locations are. It depends also on what modes of transport that we have, how flexible they can be, what customer base we have, and how we manage that whole process. Now, we have quite a lot of detail here, and I think this will be important on inland ports. So here we have inland ports, and essentially they're also known as dry ports, and as they say, they're not a seaport, they are inland. And if you want to have a look at a real world example, then we've got Duisburg in Germany is one of the world's largest dry ports, and we will see that Daistruk actually own 2 inland ports. These offer great flexibility, especially when you are looking at rail. And because of that flexibility and that rail distribution, they are often cheaper in terms of storage and distribution as well. Okay. But we need to have good rail links. Now, seaports, and we know there's a couple of those in Roundland, have to have good rail links, but seaports can be more expensive than our inland rail ports as well. Okay, so in terms of potential exam day scenarios that we may see, again, that government influence, so they will impact on that rail infrastructure, and that impacts then on the importance of those inland ports. And also, the more we use inland ports, then the more by inference that we would use the rail structure, and therefore the more environmentally friendly something would be. Now, ideally, I had planned to have a little look at Daistruk with you, but we are just about over time at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish off this page. We will have a little look at an introduction, and then hopefully I will be seeing some of you for the next one, where we would look at Daistruk in more detail. I am hoping, though, that I've been able to weave in some information throughout as well. So for Daistruk, it has been around for about 65 years. So we are a well-established company. We started off as a transport company and grew rapidly through investment. Okay, now we are listed, and we listed in 1978. And as we said at the outset, this gives us wider access to finance. Make sure you're ready to talk about rights issues and share-for-share exchanges, for example. And also in the next precinct, we'll look a lot more at corporate governance and what that may mean for us. We'll look at the structure of the board, we'll look at board committees, and we'll talk about some common questions that come up for that. We employ 22,000 people. So I've talked about the government a lot. This means we are a large employer in Rhineland. The government has a lot of influence and power over us. However, they also need us. We are a huge employer, and we employ 7,000 drivers. And hopefully I've set the scene for how important these drivers are. We know that certain different licenses are required for certain different vehicles, and we know there is a huge talent shortage, both in the short term, but also that aging driver population. It also introduces that idea that I floated to start off with, is do we want to employ these drivers, or should we be looking at having them as independent contractors? Sort of the gig economy idea, that is a way of certainly reducing costs, but we would need to balance that out with how much control we would have over those drivers as well. And if we have less control, how can we ensure things like safety and that side of things? So a lot of issues to come in there. I would also encourage you, like I said, to have a look at Uber Freight. So that is one where it would look at self-employed drivers as well, because it was interesting, actually. They talked about the number of cancellations that is in the system, and the amount of spare or unused capacity that can be within a system at any one time, and using technology and software to plug that gap. So again, potentially something that Daistruk could have a look at. We are now in the position that we are one of the largest third-party logistics providers in Rhineland. So what benefits does that bring to us? Certainly when we looked at our unique selling point, critical success factor, if we are bigger, can we offer a better cost base to customers, and are we able to attract customers from that way? Again, if we're bigger, if we have these so-called nodes and different transport links around Rhineland, does that mean that we can offer our customers more flexibility because of that? And can we leverage off our reputation of one of the largest? From a reputational risk point of view, though, think about our capacity for reputational risk damage. If we are quoted, very public, and if we're one of the largest ones, we're going to need to protect that reputation fiercely as well. So just a little introduction there to Daistruk, and the focus of the second precinct will be looking at that in detail and weaving in all of that industry backdrop that we have had a look at today as well. So I hope that has been helpful. And again, I shall say hello and see if we have any questions. Okay, so it has taken a long time to go through those first pages, but I find that we use those all the time. They're so important. So I shall just have a little look. I'm going to scoot back to the questions. So is there a past pre-scene or exam that you would recommend? That's a great question as well. Emma, I haven't seen one obviously that's like a logistics company before, and I would tend to say make sure that you have a look at past papers from 2019 onwards, because that's where we've had that new syllabus. When I think about the ones that we have looked at since then, there was one that was about a technology park. It was a private company. And I don't think that's as, I don't think we'll get a lot from having a look at that one. We had a look at a Deliveroo style company when we looked at Snack Wheel. That's quite a good one because some similar issues around talent shortage, drivers, gig economy, the importance of software and digitization, managing risk. That, though it's not obviously a direct match, that could be useful for you to have a look at. We had a look at an airport operator, maybe less useful. We had a look at a gaming company. That was great. Again, ideas around talent shortage and that digital strategy there. But I would say anything that's quoted and fairly recent would be good. I really like having a look at past papers, have a look at the scenarios and try and imagine an analogous situation that you might see. It gets you looking back in the pre-scene and again sort of gives you that flexibility. So case study has put an extra emphasis on risk management, control, cyber risk and capital structure. I would totally agree with you there. Risk management comes up a lot, and that would include strategic risks as well as those operational risks. And certainly we can see a lot of seeds sown within this pre-scene for that as well. You know, health and safety, legal issues, the influence of government. Other things that I would have a look at, definitely digital strategy from an E3 point of view, definitely stakeholder management from an E3 point of view, and ethics as well. I would also include best practice corporate governance in there. And from an F3 point of view, again, not exclusive, this list, make sure you consider currency risk, how it could be tested, and hopefully we've given you some ideas for that. And from an F3 point of view as well, I would be having a look at integrated reporting because it ties in with that sustainability side. However, I would recommend that you get yourselves a copy of the SCS strategic blueprint. If you join me in the elite group, that's something we will go through in the first workshop. It gives you those I can statements and very much use that as an active study tool. So imagine scenarios that might come up to test those. And that will give you the areas from each of the pillars that are tested a lot. Oh, some really, really nice side of things. And very interesting to see different people's professions coming through here as well as a civil engineer. I'm always fingers crossed, hopeful that we have various different people within our group who work in this industry. We do get that quite a lot, depending on the different industries, and they're obviously invaluable to the group as well. In terms of how far we get, again, I never know how far I'm able to go with these precincts. I have to play it by ear in terms of how many questions come through or how much we chat. So that's as far as I'll be able to go on this one. And then the rest of it obviously will come through with a course. I have tried as I've gone through to sow seeds of things that are in the latter half in terms of those news stories, in terms of, for example, one of the most important areas for me is the principal risks. But unfortunately, time has been against us today for that. Oh, and I'm glad certainly you feel less worried about things. Good. The next live session is tomorrow. So we have our industry analysis tomorrow. And then I think on Wednesday evening, we have the second half of the pre-scene. So that's when that will all come together. A copy of the annotations. Now, as far as I know, and this might be one for Thomas rather than me, will come if you're on the Viva site. I don't know what happens if you just get a copy of the recording, but presumably you could go through quite slowly on that side. So I actually don't know the answer to that one, I'm afraid, Victoria, on that one. CIVA Logistics is CEVA. That is the name of the company that I've had a look at so far. And then again, I'll be expanding my research on that. So I've already covered when the next session is. External sources to have a look at. Again, we will see some of those tomorrow. What I would just summarize for you, let me see, what have I used the most? McKinsey, they have their Insights app, but I think if you googled McKinsey logistics disruptors, I think it's a series of about 8 interviews and videos. I find that super helpful. The other one that I used was CEVA Logistics, CEVA Logistics on YouTube. Have a look at their channel. And then was it Cerasis, CERASIS? That was a good one for the difference between third-party logistics and fourth-party logistics, but there's loads of them. And other than that, I have just been Googling. I always set my news app. So I use the BBC News app, and I always try to set it up to whatever industry we are looking at the time. And you will see references that Viva have made to various different sources throughout. So you might want to have a look at those. Those of you who come on to the industry analysis, Viva have put together a source list through there. For those of you that are on the elite course, if you chase me up, I can put, and I do post a lot of links on that to things that I have read and had a look at as well. Okay. So the notes, as I said, I'm not entirely 100% sure on the answer for that one. Definitely you get the annotated notes and the annotated financials that we will look at in the next precinct if you subscribe to a course as well. So in terms of major issues by logistics companies, quite a wide question. The things that I would look at so far would be talent shortage, I would say environmental issues, and that need to invest in capital and technology and software, which then you ultimately have to sell out to clients. So that upfront investment is quite risky. But I would say one of the major issues would be the digitization of the process and whether we are going to be ready for that. Oh no, another half left a logistics company. Hopefully they'll still have lots of stories. The financial ratios, we will have a look at the next precinct. The ones that I tend to look at the most would be things like the dividend payout. I would look at the approximate cost of debt. I would be having a look at our gearing. I would have a look at things like liquidity, anything that builds into my ability to raise finance. So I very much look and see what would my shareholders be looking at in terms of risk and return, and what would any debt holders be looking at in terms of risk and return. They are the ones that I would tend to have a look at the most, because we tend to use those the most when we're looking at raising finance. Other things we'd look at is like the PPE base, again from a raising finance point of view for securitization. So they would be the things that I would have a look at. Definitely the war in terms of a geopolitical event, that is perfect. And as we said in that context statement at the outset, if it is relevant to the scenario, by all means mention it. But the examiner's saying we can assume maybe a more utopian world as such, to set the backdrop. Tomorrow's webinar, as far as I know, is 7 o'clock UK time for that. Okay, and good to see a couple of names from I know people who had postponed sittings before. So good to see you again there, Elizabeth. Yes, 7 p.m. UK time. Double check that though, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So I'll just have a quick look at the Q&A. mostly for Thomas there, and a question on how Daistruk would advertise their services. What a great question there. I would assume that it would be via a website, maybe via word of mouth, and maybe in some kind of industry specific publication with regard to logistics and supply chain management as well. In terms of getting a Zoom link to attend the sessions tomorrow, as far as I know, if you sign up for the course, then you are added onto the Circle app, and you register for all the webinars and, if appropriate, the workshops on that. That's where you get all of the links there. Certainly that's where all of my links come for that. But if you are unsure about that, please email info rather at viva.tuition.com. If you're stuck, I will be checking my messages tomorrow. You're more than welcome to email me. That's laura@viva.tuition.com as well. But hopefully all of those things will be sorted out. If you do register, I will remind the guys at Viva to make sure that everyone has details of those sessions as well. The industry analysis is great, but by far and away my favorite are the applied series. They're fabulous. We look at technical top-ups, but also real-world application to those as well. Okay, so I think that is everyone's questions asked. Hopefully I've given you lots to think about. For those of you that I won't see, very, very best of luck on your strategic case study course. I do wish you all the best. Just practice as much as you can, really get into the precinct, get into the industry, and you should be fine. And for those of you that I will see on other sessions, then I'll look forward to seeing you later on in the week. Okay, so take care, everyone, and hopefully I will see a lot of you soon. All right, bye-bye. Take care. Good to see that I'll see you tomorrow then. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.